Hey, how's it going everyone, and welcome back to my series Which Game is Better. Previously I did Assassin's Creed Origins vs Odyssey and Assassin's Creed Unity vs Syndicate, and for this video we will be discussing something highly debated, Ghost Recon Wildlands vs Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Just in case you are not aware, Ghost Recon Wildlands came out first in 2017, while Breakpoint came out in 2019. If you're not familiar with this series, we take two games from the same franchise and rate them on their story, gameplay, and open world, each getting a rating from 1 to 10. We then total up the score out of 30, and whichever game has the highest score is, in my opinion, the better game. These videos used to contain spoilers, but for this one I decided not to include any spoilers, since a lot of you said you use these videos as a way to decide which game to buy. Also, if you are looking for a more in-depth review on both Ghost Recon Wildlands and Ghost Recon Breakpoint, the links are in the description. But now that that is all out of the way, let's get this started. Starting with the story for Ghost Recon Breakpoint. If you watched my review on Ghost Recon Breakpoint, you will know that I am not a big fan of this game's story. The protagonist Nomad, who is not to be confused with the Nomad from Wildlands, is really just a poor character in my opinion. To me, Nomad is just a blank slate. It was clear Nomad was made with the idea of allowing the players to create their own customizable character, which is completely fine. The only problem with that, however, is that it makes for an awfully boring character in the story missions. Nomad never displays any true traits or development throughout the story, and there are no standout supporting characters that are able to pick up the lack of personality from Nomad. Nomad's motivations in Breakpoint are extremely basic, and his connection to Cole Walker is very unclear and confusing. They tried to add flashbacks to show more of the relationship between Walker and Nomad, and honestly, it is hardly a connection at all. They served in the army together. Yeah. It is a good thing that Cole Walker is actually a pretty good antagonist, otherwise this story would have been incredibly dull. However, Cole Walker didn't have a lot of runtime, and what runtime he did have was the flashbacks, which again didn't give us much other than the fact that Cole was always upset with his superiors. The game really didn't give us anything solid in these flashbacks that clearly explained why Walker decided to go all rogue and evil. Honestly, my main issue with the story is just how boring it really is though. The personality and true interest was just not there at all for me while playing the story, and Breakpoint's story never really had me just dying to know what happens next. And it is for these reasons that I'm giving Breakpoint's story a 5 out of 10. Shifting gears, let's talk about the story for Ghost Recon Wildlands. Wildlands' story is already so much more interesting straight from the beginning. In Wildlands, you once again are playing as a character named Nomad, and just like Breakpoint, you are the leader of an elite squad. Except in Wildlands, you are actually the leader of an elite squad. The concept of dismantling a drug cartel that owns a country of Bolivia already sounds way more interesting than stopping an ex-coworker on an island from achieving some vague evil plan. Now I will say that Nomad in Wildlands suffers from a similar problem of Nomad from Breakpoint, in as he has little to no traits or development, but however the difference is that Wildlands has Agent Bowman. Agent Bowman is really more of the main character for Wildlands, and she exhibits plenty of unique personality traits, and she has some fantastic development at the end of the story. A character like Bowman is exactly what Breakpoint was missing. Wildlands also did a much better job at keeping the players engaged even when there were no cutscenes, because you always knew something big was about to happen. Wildlands also has a much better cast with side characters like Pakatari and side villains like Nydia Flores that gave the game more flavor and diversity. El Sueño was also a pretty good villain, and just like Cole Walker, he definitely needed more runtime. And while Wildlands' story may have been much shorter than Breakpoint's, it was much more focused and better at delivering its overall narrative. And for that reason, Ghost Recon Wildlands receives an 8 out of 10 for the story. Moving on, let's now talk about the gameplay for Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Breakpoint's gameplay is very mixed for me. I think the movement, animations, and gunplay were a nice improvement from Wildlands, but there are just some features and important mechanics that are missing from Breakpoint. For example, AI teammates. One of the best and most beloved features from Ghost Recon Wildlands was your squad of AI teammates, and in Breakpoint, they are just non-existent. I have no idea what was going on in those Ubisoft offices that made them think that removing the AI teammates would be a good idea. They just completely removed the whole idea of being a squad leader, and instead they decided it would be best if a special operative acted like a superhero and just lone wolfed everything. Which isn't just unrealistic, but is plain out stupid. Another prime example is the limitations placed on abilities. For some reason, there is only like half of the amount of abilities in Breakpoint as there was in Wildlands, and they made it so you can only equip a select few, which is ridiculous. There are also just some small things like being able to holster your weapons and binoculars that are just not in Breakpoint, and there is no good reason for why this is the case. And one of my biggest problems with Wildlands gameplay was the poor handling on vehicles, and guess what? It is the exact same in Breakpoint. In fact, it is even harder to drive because of the lack of roads. And I know customization isn't technically gameplay, but this needed to be addressed. How do you make a quote-unquote sequel with even less customization than the previous game? And for some reason they found it necessary to remove your character's mask or helmet in cutscenes, which I just don't understand. What features they did add to the gameplay just kind of sucked. The drones being the main thing, because they are extremely annoying and overpowered and make stealth 5 times harder, which I'm not opposed to new enemy types and more challenge, but the drones are just ridiculous. Ubisoft even knows this, as they are planning to give the players an option to remove the drones in one of the future updates. The one improvement you could really argue for is the loadout system, which doesn't have a big enough impact on the gameplay to really even properly credit it. Breakpoint's gameplay isn't terrible, but just the fact that they managed to downgrade it from Wildlands scores it a 6 out of 10. Now, after that, Wildlands gameplay doesn't need much explanation, but I just wanted to talk about a few things. AI teammates for one, were great. Doing sing shots and stealth and using them to hold positions or stall enemies was fantastic. There were a few bugs with them where they could magically spot or shoot some enemies through walls, but that's about it. Your AI teammates could also revive you, which was great and made being spotted by enemies a lot less frustrating. Your character is also way more upgradable in this game. You had a lot more control over your statistics, and it was more enjoyable to grind for. You also have a lot of gadget variety in Wildlands, and you even get to use the rebels of the area to help you with reinforcements, spotting, and direct mortar fire. And not having to deal with drones or tanks was a huge relief on its own. Like I mentioned earlier, the vehicles in both Breakpoint and Wildlands are in poor states, but other than that, I really don't have too many complaints on Wildlands gameplay. It is exactly what you would come to expect from an open world shooter, and the fact that its gameplay is still better than Breakpoint's, even though it came out 2 years before, is very impressive, and for that, Wildlands scores a 9 out of 10 on the gameplay. Breakpoint's open world is probably the best part about the game. Aurora is a very big open world, which can sometimes be annoying because it will take a long time to get to the objective, but still, the large open world allows for plenty of side objectives, exploration, and loot to discover. The variety the world has is also really nice. There are lots of different environments to discover, and there's definitely more variety than in Wildlands. My issue with Aurora is that since it is such a large map, it has a lot of dead space, and trying to travel from objective to objective can at times be very long and boring. Other than that though, Aurora is a decent open world, and it is one of the nicest looking worlds I've seen from a Tom Clancy game, so Breakpoint's open world scores a 9 out of 10. Wildlands open world is also great. Bolivia looks fantastic, and while there may not be a lot of variety like in Breakpoint's Aurora, you will still stumble upon some snowy mountains or forests every now and again. I will say I like the size of Wildlands map a lot more. It isn't as big as Breakpoint's, but make no mistake, it is still huge. Each province in the game feels like it belongs there and wasn't just randomly placed, so I really appreciated that. You also didn't have to travel as far in between missions, since the story missions are going to be in the same province you are doing your intel missions for. Wildlands open world was very fun to explore, and it is beautiful to look at. However, I can't deny Breakpoint this one, so we will give Breakpoint this one and score Wildlands an 8 out of 10 on the open world. That brings a grand total of 20 for Ghost Recon Breakpoint and 25 for Ghost Recon Wildlands. That leaves Ghost Recon Wildlands as the better game, and rightfully so. Although I feel very strongly about Wildlands being better, if you think Breakpoint is better, feel free to argue your side down in the comments. And if you have more to add on why Wildlands is better, feel free to do so as well. If you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I am almost at 700 subscribers, so thank you guys so much, and thanks for watching, and I will see you again in the next one.